mortals, and welcome to Death, 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 the podcast about death, dying, and how it relates to us, the living. My name is Jordan Balgis, and I am here, as always, with...
Jasmine Rayburn.
And Robert Irvin.
Heck yeah!
Yeah.
And today... Smokey!
I'm gonna do the whole episode with this voice.
So
And you can't stop me.
Today, sensual listener, we are talking about disenfranchised grief.
ASMR edition.
All right, that's
Yeah.
a good way to get into it, I guess.
Disenfranchised grief.
Yeah,
Take
a
it.
very not funny thing.
Yeah, well,
Well,
I mean, I think this is something I was not aware of, a term I was not aware of.
yeah.
So you brought it into my life, Jasmine.
Yeah, it's something that I didn't think when you first suggested it like a week ago or whatever it was, 5 days ago. I was like, I don't know if this is going to apply to me.
Yeah, right?
All
That's
of
how a
my
lot of
deaths
people
have been,
Yeah.
I've dealt with them totally properly.
Yeah, I am a well-rounded human being with my shit figured out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
my
the more I
grief
read
is
about it, I was like,
complete.
oh, fuck.
Well, and the term itself was coined by Dr. Kenneth Doka.
Doka in the house.
Yeah, so he's the man.
What up, dope?
Did you guys watch the YouTube link of him talking about disenfranchised
There was a
grief?
YouTube link in there?
That one I actually missed, yeah. I read
Okay.
the article, but I didn't watch the link.
Well, he basically just talks about what disenfranchised grief is and how he came about kind of
Coining
looking
the
into it. And basically the summary is he was talking to different people about their experiences, and it came up a widow of an ex-wife whose husband had died, and they had a really horrible divorce.
Mm.
And just not having a place for her grief in that, and not feeling like she could heal from that, because some people would come up to her and be like, you
Yeah.
got him, because he like cheated on her with a close friend, and they had like a really horrible.
Yeah, so, I guess, so disenfranchised grief is just kind of grief that you don't feel you're allowed to feel.
Yeah,
Kind of
where
like
society doesn't support your grief. Doka describes it as grief that persons experience when they incur a loss that is not or cannot be openly acknowledged, socially sanctioned, or publicly mourned. And that's not just about death, it's about loss in general, divorce, adoption, things like that. So grief often is, talked about in how it relates to death.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of disenfranchised grief that's not just about death.
Yeah,
That's important.
that was one thing that I found really interesting in reading through this, is the idea of grieving something that isn't, because you associate it with death
Yeah.
automatically and kind of don't think beyond that, but it can be
The
grieving.
The one I found interesting was like loss of a home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like if you had a home that burned down.
Which I have very good friends that
Yeah.
did happen to them, and I remember that. I remember because you're losing so many things that are personal to you,
Well,
right? So many
it's like
mementos.
losing a loved one almost.
Yeah, and
you have it's like
you
so
go
many
through
memories.
a lot of the same feelings, but if it's not acknowledged as grief, you don't really heal from it either. So
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons, just a little shout out to non-death grief. I'll
Looking at
go-
you, non-death grief.
Yeah,
My boy.
I'll go into it a
NDG.
little bit more, just kind of in the subcategories. So Doka, the guy,
The guy.
My guy.
our man of the hour.
My dude. My guy.
He suggests that this can happen for a number of reasons, and usually in the following categories. So 1, like the house fire, the loss isn't seen as worthy of grief, non-death losses. 2, the relationship is stigmatized. Say you're like, the mistress.
Having an extramarital affair.
Yeah.
One thing that I thought of too on this topic was like gay relationships, specifically in the past too,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that.
For sure.
Maybe not recognized by the person's family or something like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Where the family is like strictly prioritized and the partner has nowhere to go with that.
Yeah.
And no legal recourse as well to
If,
grieve.
if like before, especially before it was legal
Or-
to get married, right?
Or if the person is not out and they can't, like they might be feeling their grief, but they can't share it because
that's
Yeah.
they're not out yet.
Yeah. And that's, I'm sure, resulted in a lot of
pain.
trauma.
Yeah, for sure.
There's also the mechanism of death is stigmatized. So drug overdoses, suicide.
Mhm.
If you're the driver in a drunk driving accident, if you're
Yeah.
if you die in prison,
Mm-hmm.
You know, your loved ones may be experiencing disenfranchised grief.
Right.
Also, the person grieving is not recognized as a griever. Coworkers, ex-partners, maybe ex-friends you didn't have a great relationship with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I feel that one.
Yeah.
For sure.
You know, it's like, it's hard to put that because it's like, it's complicated, you know, just because you didn't like someone doesn't mean that they didn't have a place in your life or that you didn't love them.
Yeah, they still had an impact on your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Even like estranged family members, things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the last one would be the way someone is grieving is stigmatized. So some people don't grieve the way you would think. Some people are very inward. Some people want to move on right away. You know, like some people go through like they want to deal with the possessions right away. And people are like, how could you be so cold wanting to
people
deal
are like,
with.
whoa, slow down.
But they just like, that's how they.
Yeah, that might be
grieve.
somebody keeping busy and trying to accomplish tasks to kind of help them through that
Yeah.
process or something like that.
Totally.
Like
sure.
have like something to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Or someone
Yeah.
maybe who, you know, like the laugh at a funeral people who cope that way. You know, they're like, oh, they're not really sad because they're laughing or they're not grieving appropriately.
Yeah.
And that can go the other direction as well for people who grieve kind of too long, you know, as well. Like if people go, okay, that's enough. You should be over it now.
Which is a bullshit thing to say, but
It's fucked up.
But people do say that.
Well, we're conditioned to feel that way.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll get into bereavement and how our society supports the grieving in a bit, but
It is, yeah, I think it's people just keep going.
Fair enough.
good
point.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We'll get it. I was like, oh, well,
It's-
we're going to
it's
get into it.
I think number 5 is a really, I mean, they're all very important, but I definitely think that as far as kind of structures we can put in place to support people, supporting different types of grief and different timelines for grief is really kind of the way forward.
Yeah, support is important, right? Because I think we just have this idea that it makes people uncomfortable, other people grieving as well, right? So they have a limited amount of, I guess, like patience for it before they start being like, all right, you're still making me uncomfortable with your grief.
Yeah.
Stop it, kind of thing.
People say some really fucked up, unhelpful things as well because they're uncomfortable with it. They say dismissive things like they're in a better place or they wouldn't want you to grieve or, you know, like,
Yeah.
you know, so yeah, there's so if anyone kind of looked at this and was like, oh, I'm not affected by disenfranchised grief, chances are you are. You just don't know it because you haven't had an opportunity to recognize that you're grieving.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I said the exact same thing, or maybe I didn't say it out loud, but I definitely thought it. I was like, I don't know if this is going to apply to me this episode. Like, I'm not going to have a ton to say, but the more I read about it and the more I read, like, whatever it is, the 60 examples of disenfranchised grief, I was like, oh,
yeah.
I fall into a lot of these categories.
Yeah, chances are, listener, that at least one of these categories is going to apply to you, I think.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. Going to the website whatsyourgrief.com. I kind of stumbled upon it doing some research for this, and they have an article called 64 Examples of Disenfranchised Grief, and it's just a massive list of everything that applies. And it just covers things really nicely, and they've got a few kind of articles about the experience of disenfranchised grief, and then we can kind of get on coping afterwards. But check that out. They've got some really great examples. We can't get them all. There's just too many.
Mm-hmm. There was a really good article that a friend of mine at work sent to me, somewhat on this concept, where a disabled man passed away, but he had a huge following on a streaming site. Like, he was an online streamer. His parents thought that he had, like, no friends. Like they thought that he was just like this total loner.
Yeah.
Was in his room all the time. Didn't think that anyone followed his channel. And then when he passed away, all these people started flocking to his parents to try and figure out how to grieve.
Yeah.
They had no idea how to handle it.
Well, that's actually its own category, and that's called cyber loss.
Yeah.
a new type of disenfranchised grief, as if there wasn't enough already.
The future is now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mourning for people you've never met.
Oh man, what's gonna happen when we start having
But still have a
robots
relationship with.
and robots start breaking down and we start grieving our robots?
I would be
yeah.
if my Roomba died, I'd be like
Yeah, I think that's already a thing.
I'd be fucking choked. Yeah.
Like, your phone is basically a robot. When
Yeah.
your phone smashes, you grieve your phone.
Yeah,
being
you
broken.
feel that feeling
Yeah.
in the pit of your stomach.
I mostly grieve the hundreds of dollars
Yeah.
it's gonna cost me to buy a new one.
That's part of it.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't be like
attached.
attaching ourselves to like every type of. Yeah, all grief is valuable, guys.
Totally.
All of it. It's not a competition.
No, my Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. I'll never find another. Oh, there's one.
Yeah, oh, sweet.
Buy another
Oh,
one.
and this one's in a better color.
Oh,
Yeah, I like it.
this one's bigger.
So I guess we should probably get a little bit personal here, seeing as we're talking about
Let's get personal.
Personal.
setting the
Let's
tone.
get personal.
Yeah, I mean,
I sing more on this podcast than I do.
in life. Yeah.
Yeah, you have like the shield of no one having to see your face.
That's true.
It's the anonymity.
They just have to listen
Well,
to
it's
my
not really
terrible
anonymity, but-
voice.
I still shudder every time I hear my own voice. Like, ugh, gross.
Ugh. Anyway,
Yeah, personal. Okay.
Personal.
So I'm just
personal.
gonna bring up this list.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have like one pretty good example that I didn't really think of until I started reading
let's get into it.
that 64 things. It was so a friend of mine took his life probably a year and a half ago now. And everyone it's a shitty situation because he was spending a lot of time at my house because he was dating my roommate who's also a coworker. And like, I talked about him a lot because I was frustrated with him because he was like keeping me up at night
Yeah.
and like drinking my beer. And I was frustrated with him, but he was still my friend.
Yeah.
And so when he eventually did kill himself, and obviously my roommate was like grieving heavily,
Yeah.
a bunch of people at work, because I was still working, they were like, I don't understand why you're so messed up about this guy's death. Like, you didn't really like him that much. And I was like, I couldn't really say how I felt at the time,
Yeah.
but I was like, no, he's still my friend, and he still died, and that's sad.
Yeah. It's still
I
somebody.
was just frustrated with him, but I
Yeah.
felt like alienated, and I felt like I couldn't really mourn properly
Yeah.
because people didn't take my grief seriously. And I didn't really realize what that was until you brought up disenfranchised grief.
Yeah.
But
it's
like
so
everybody, like even my friend who was dating the guy
Yeah.
was like, didn't understand why I was grieving because she also thought I didn't like him.
Yeah. Well, I think it's
But I did.
also and I think it's also easier to, like in a situation like that, put your grief aside to kind of like support that friend, right?
Yeah,
kind
that was a big
put
part
the
of it
focus
too.
on it as well,
That was a big
without
part of
really
it too.
checking in on
Like
it yourself.
Yeah, when someone else's grief is so much more visible than yours, because I probably am pretty introverted when I grieve. Like,
Yeah.
I don't really show it too much,
Yeah.
except to my close friends, and even those friends were like, I don't understand why you're so messed up about this kind of thing. And I still don't think I've convinced people that I had a right to grieve in that situation. And in that sense, I don't think I ever really processed it
Mhm.
in a proper way.
And that's a weird thing too, right? In that like the use of the word like convince people that like it almost
Yeah.
feels like you have to convince people that
yeah.
you are
Well, you
sad
do.
and that it's okay.
You do. I mean, there's that expectation. I do want to say something about kind of, there are circles of grief,
Yeah.
like if, one of my friends passed away, I wouldn't necessarily look to grieve to their parent.
No.
But
The one thing I will say is that because we all worked together, like me and this guy and a bunch of his friends, they were all really good and supportive.
Yeah.
Like all my friends that knew him really well and that we had worked together in past restaurants, they were all awesome about it. And
Yeah.
they were like my support group for sure. But everyone else in my life didn't really understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to kind of seek out people who are in the same tier
Yeah.
as you
Yeah.
when you are processing grief. And sometimes when those aren't available at all, like you can end up seeking out support and kind of unhelpful ways or
Sure.
from inappropriate sources, right?
Or just cutting yourself off.
Yeah.
And like that's definitely what I did for a good portion of my grieving was I
Yeah.
just like sat alone in my room. That's when I did like most of my stick and pokes on myself.
Oh,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
So it was
We can
like
definitely talk
definitely
about
unhealthy coping.
coping with incomplete grief.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the number one, I think, side effect of disenfranchised grief is incomplete grief, and that can lead to some really fucked up
Yeah.
things. You know, and
That
certainly-
being said, I'm very happy with all my stick and pokes. I just realized it as unhealthy coping in the moment, and I was like, I'm gonna make the best of this.
yeah, at least
Yeah.
it's gonna
I'm gonna
be
make
good.
these really good.
Yeah,
But yeah, it was
well,
it was
you
a
gotta
weird
put
time.
That, you got to put that somewhere. You know,
Yeah.
you can't just like inhale indefinitely. You know, you're gonna have to exhale at some point. And
Yeah.
if you don't do it in a healthy way, it's gonna come out in other ways. You know, but. Yeah, I think that's a pretty relatable one. Grieving for someone who you like publicly,
Weren't super close with.
Yeah.
or like
well,
where you actually
or-
like said, I don't like this person.
Well, I was
you know?
Yeah.
close with him. Like we'd spent a lot of time together hanging out at the house, and we were good friends. But every now and again, I'd complain about him at work,
Yeah,
Which
and then like
Yeah.
that's a human thing.
it's my roommate's boyfriend. Like there's no way that he's going to be a perfect being.
No,
Like he's
if anyone's around too much, they start to get annoying. Really.
yeah, and that
But-
doesn't mean that I didn't love him and didn't
Is
have a
that
great
what
relationship
you
with
guys-
him.
you want me to leave? Is that what
Yeah.
you're saying?
Bye,
Yeah,
Jordan.
Get out of here.
All right.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
We'll take it from here.
Yeah, that's a rough one.
Yeah, it was a strange thing, and I think I realized that it was an unhealthy grief process in the moment, but I didn't really do anything about it. And once people started to write off my grief, I didn't even bother trying to justify it
Well, because
because
like
it was just like, it's like, what's the point?
God
Maybe they're
forbid
right
someone
or
accuses
something,
you,
you know?
of grieving for attention
Yeah.
or latching on, because that does happen.
I
Yeah.
think
People
that's
in
the fear,
yeah,
right?
on the outside tier. You know, sometimes like I have people in my life that used to be in my life. I don't really keep them around anymore, but that I would kind of call bad news fairies.
Okay.
You know, every time something happens, they're the people who share RIP distant acquaintance on their Facebook before all the family members are notified, you know, that kind of stuff.
Quote unquote makes it about them.
Yeah, and I think people who sometimes that perception stops people from who have legitimate grief from feeling that grief, because it's like you're I would be horrified, and I certainly have grieved in a way where I feel like it could have been perceived that I was like making it about me.
Yeah.
You know.
I think that's my fear every time I'm grieving.
Yeah.
No matter what, no matter like what the relationship is, I think that's something that's very much in my head while I am is like, and probably why I don't show that much outwardly is because I'm constantly, I'm worrying that like, oh, well, I don't want people to think that I'm trying to make this about me or that,
Yeah.
you know, looking for it, which is just in life something that I do. So of course it's going to transfer over to grieving.
Yeah.
And I think that it's easier, at least for me, to kind of just put that energy into trying to deal with other people's grief instead of dealing with my own.
There's a control in that, right? Like wanting to, if you just focus all of your grief and that energy into helping other people, you can be like, oh, I'm
Feeling like you're
doing
supportive and you're
something
being
good
productive.
here.
Yeah.
But you can actually put your own needs in the back burner, and then they come up later,
For sure.
you know?
I definitely experienced that too. It's hard when you, like your main instinct is to help the people that are feeling the grief very visibly,
Yeah.
and you want to help them and you want to flock to them and support them, but then you're just like, well, what do I do with all my feelings? No one's helping me in any way.
Or it's convenient because you don't have to think about your feelings.
Yeah.
And you can feel kind of good about it in a way to, you know, in a situation, especially when your grief is disenfranchised, where you don't feel like there's space for your grief, and you're like, what do I do with this? And you go, oh, I could be helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You know,
exactly.
that's something I can do. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, as long as it's not a substitution for dealing with your own grief, you know, like helping other people when they're in grief is you know,
It's important.
it's
yeah.
an important and fundamentally helpful thing, you know, but
I think it's just a basic human instinct.
it should be,
Yeah.
I think.
Oh yeah, you're right. It should be.
yeah.
Right.
Because we're social creatures. That's
Yeah.
that's where we are, is supporting each other.
Yeah, and you know, caring for the grieving is, you know, a wonderful thing, and I don't want to knock that, but it's you're not going all the way if you don't stop and take some space for yourself to mourn.
Yeah.
Self-care.
Yeah.
Self-care.
Even if you didn't know the person that well, even processing the grief of people you care about is something that can take a toll on you as a person, and that needs its own space too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what about you, Jordan? Have you had any experiences with disenfranchised grief?
One thing that this got me thinking about that I didn't, it's not specifically about me, but like I've talked about before about my grandpa passing away, and my parents are divorced now, and he passed away after their divorce. They've been divorced for 10 years now.
Right.
But one thing I remember is that during the funeral, my dad did go to the funeral, but he kind of just like snuck in the back.
Really?
Yeah. Like, sat through the funeral, and then once like the service was done, kind of just like bolted out. Like I didn't even like talk to him. He didn't really, just kind of came and paid his respects and left, which in hindsight is kind of like, I wish he would have felt more comfortable to kind of spend more time there and to kind of do that. Like I think he felt out of place.
Felt like it wasn't his place to mourn in this situation.
Yeah, or just didn't want to. I think just was probably just an uncomfortable situation for him, right? Like my mom's there and she's there with her now husband, or no, and like that kind of stuff.
Right.
Which is unfortunate, and I think something that probably happens a lot now with the way families are in divorce, and the nuclear family's kind of gone, and people have these different relationships.
How long were your parents married for?
Just under 25 years, I think, maybe. Like they were together a long time.
So your dad had a family relationship with this person.
Yeah.
I certainly know that this is something that my father experienced when my grandmother passed away. He did not handle it well.
No.
I won't get into the details of it, but it was bad.
Yeah.
Because it's like you have this relationship with someone, and then suddenly, a messy divorce, you're not allowed to care.
You're supposed to just cut off
Or
almost.
why do you care anymore?
Yeah, you're
It's probably a common thing that's thrown around. Why do you even care?
Every ride he'd given her to the doctors, every holiday, suddenly that's meaningless. Certainly to all of my grandmother's family, and certainly my mother, just like, no, how dare you?
Yeah.
Insert yourself into this.
Yeah.
Like you lost that. And I feel really sad about that. I certainly don't think that he should have been expecting support from
them.
No.
But I do feel like, it is an oversight to think that people who are in that experience don't experience grief after they've had.
For sure.
And
and I think, and like my mom's side of the family and stuff, everyone was glad that he did come there, and there wouldn't have been a problem with it, but it is also just a very uncomfortable situation.
Yeah, he probably
right?
just felt really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I can empathize with that, for sure.
That's tough.
It's
no spot
crappy,
for
but
you.
I could definitely empathize with him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's no place. Did you go to the service?
I didn't. So I was working for the actual funeral.
Right.
So I missed that, but I went to the wake afterwards, which was really hard.
Yeah.
But there was a viewing of the body the week before the actual funeral, the actual ceremony. And I went to that, and it was good, but I definitely spent a lot of time there just supporting my roommate and not really, like I reached out to like our mutual friends, like we had all worked together, and we shared some nice stories, and we laughed and cried and hugged and all that, and it was good, but then it still didn't really feel like, I don't know, it still didn't really feel like I belonged there, because there was so much family that I didn't know, and I knew like all of maybe 6 people there.
Yeah, that's a different thing too. I think is being just a very specific part of this person's life.
Yeah.
And not really being knowing family and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Their history or.
Yeah, it can make you feel kind of out of place as well.
Yeah.
I remember when I was still working with you guys, it was like early on, and I found out about everything, and I think I'd only talked to you like maybe once before that.
Yeah.
you know, and I went to ask you how your roommate was doing, and then I said, like, I'm really sorry for your loss. I'm sorry you're going through that. And you looked really surprised.
You were one of the first people
You
to
know,
actually
like,
mention it.
to like no one had said that to you.
No,
you know, like,
no one
sorry
had.
for your loss.
No, you're right.
And, you know, I was just kind of taken aback by kind of that response because, you know, it's like, I guess to me it's obvious because I didn't really know the tiered relationship. I didn't know anything about it. I just knew that, of course, your roommate's partner, of course this is going to affect you.
Yeah.
You know?
See, but that's the difference is, because we were working together too, and I don't think I did say that. Like, I don't think I had that.
There was, I think, two people that approached me about it. It was you and Tommy, the sous chef. And I have, like, nothing but respect for Tommy because he's a very empathetic being.
Very empathetic person.
Although,
I love that guy.
maybe a little immature.
Yeah.
Love him.
Those
love
can
him
go
to
hand
death.
in hand sometimes.
But a very empathetic
Sensitivity.
being. And he knew that, like, he could see me struggling for sure. But that's because we were working, like, 10 hours a day together.
Yeah.
We were so close.
But
at that
sometimes
time.
it's like it's more obvious to the people who are a little bit outside of things.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's kind of a better place to look, right? Is people who aren't in it so much.
Yeah.
They're more available, right?
Yeah, and like you said, like he spent time with you before the fact, so he would notice a change.
There
Right?
was a definite change in the winds.
Yeah.
But
So-
also he himself wasn't grieving.
No.
So, you know, it's really hard looking for support sometimes when you're surrounded by people in grief.
Yeah.
Like, where do you turn? You know, everyone is so tapped out.
Yeah, everyone's tapped out, and you don't want to burden somebody that's dealing with something with your feelings as well.
Yeah, especially
Yeah.
someone who's like, you know, in the middle of it, right? Like, really close to the person.
Yeah.
Or, you know, it's like, I've definitely been in situations where I've been grieving and people like kind of wanted a piece of me and I just, you know, I want to be there for them too, but then I feel guilty because I'm too caught in my own grief to be a support to anyone else. And, you know, it's like,
It's a tricky thing.
yeah. So I guess when in doubt, always look to the tier outside of you and kind of evaluate your support system because people do care. They just need to be told.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of my biggest mistakes was that I was doing none of that. Mm-hmm. I was very in my head about it, and I was being really pragmatic where I was like, okay, well, I still have a business to run, basically.
Yeah.
Like I'm down a person for an unforeseeable amount of time. I was basically telling myself that I didn't have time to grieve.
Yeah.
Except for like
And
on my
and
days
you
off if I got them. And I
You
didn't.
didn't have time to grieve.
So it was like there was a support network around me that I wasn't utilizing, you know, and I could see everyone around me that did care, but I didn't feel like it was my place to burden them with anything.
Yeah.
Which is like usually my go-to with any kind of emotional trauma I experience. It's like, I'll handle it.
No one wants
Yeah,
to hear about
yeah.
my
I'll
shit.
handle it
Yeah.
eventually.
I think that's a specifically male thing too.
Yeah.
In the sense that you're
Unfortunately.
supposed to be kind of cut off from your emotions and you know, man up and deal with it, and
Boo.
that's instilled from you into you from childhood,
early
right?
on. Yeah.
So I think that is, if you're a dude out there, feel your feelings, yo.
Yeah,
We
it'll
get
give you
you.
cancer if you don't.
We get you, man.
Yeah, you can't hold on to that stuff forever. It'll fuck you up.
What about you, Jasmine? Do you have some
Ooh.
Whew.
disenfranchised grief that you
I
want
think-
to talk
I
about?
think like the vast majority of my grief is disenfranchised because I've lost so many like acquaintances and friends.
Yeah.
There's a couple kind of interesting examples. Probably the one that still kind of keeps me up at night. My 3 a.m. thoughts would be my my first boyfriend ever committed suicide a few years ago.
Wow.
He was my first kiss. And
And that was recent?
would have been like 5 years ago, maybe.
Yeah. That's recent enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even that it's the most recent. I've had more recent stuff, but it was because he had reached out to each one of my sisters on Facebook the week that he made that decision.
Really?
And he didn't reach out to me. And I know that's like, I feel guilty for thinking about that at all.
No, but
you know,
that's
like but it's something that just I never really like settled with, you know, like I never really.
now is that because you're like, well, maybe I could have done something, or is it more just you had this relationship with this person, and then it's kind of like what makes you?
It's complicated. So it's not just that. I mean, because I know that my sisters have, obviously, they're like, I talked to him. How come I didn't know? How come I didn't sense that something was wrong?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's, I don't think that maybe my experience is worse than that, but I feel like there's a lot of what ifs. I think realistically it was probably something simple as like there was a period of time where I just took everyone off my Facebook if I didn't talk to them in the last couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really stingy about it. And he was one of them. I hadn't talked to him in a couple of months. So I was like, I don't.
Yeah.
It was before everyone used Facebook for everything and didn't give a shit about their privacy. I still wasn't like putting
Welcome to
pictures
the
of
new
myself
age.
as my profile picture and stuff like that. And then,
My name's a fake name on there.
yeah, well, and that's totally cool. But I think at some point I just like kind of gave up and had too many friends from overseas and stuff like that I just opened it up and was like, whatever.
Yeah, I've just gone the other route of I just never go on there now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. And then there's like Facebook memorials, and we could have a whole episode on Facebook memorials.
We'll do a whole like social media and mourning thing. That's a topic that's got to have a lot.
But
to
it kind of ate me up. I think realistically what happened is I sent him a friend request, and he just didn't go on Facebook very often.
Yeah.
And it just didn't occur to him. And then he had this like moment of loneliness where he was just messaging everyone that he felt close with. But for me, it cut like a knife. I was like, did I do something to him? Because as far as I knew, we were still friendly.
Yeah.
Every time we saw each other, we were still close.
Yeah.
Like we'd spent a lot of time together in like our young teen years, and even when we weren't dating, we'd still hung out. And he was really, sensitive, and he wasn't like the cleverest guy, but he was really sweet and really into cars, and he was just like he was just too sensitive for this world, kind of, and he always seemed to be struggling with kind of anger and his own feelings, and he always made like kind of messed up decisions. Like one of our friends, like in high school, he was hit by a car on a Europe trip when he was 17, and we had this like really big wake at my house. We were like 17 or something, so just a bunch of drunk teenagers just grieving horribly.
Right.
And he drove to it drunk, and I was so mad at him. I was furious. I was like, do you think that we can really, like, we can't even handle this? Like, what are you doing? And stuff like that, so I think like maybe he thought I would yell at him or something, or maybe he knew I would know something was up and try to talk him out of it, or something, but
it's a lot of what ifs. Or like unknown.
It's not based on anything. It's just like this pain, and then also just like it was a really horrible way, with a gun, his parents' house, and just brutal.
Yikes.
I found out about it at a really rough time. I was like living at the YWCA in Banff. I was like,
oh yeah,
just going through like the most
Living the
dysfunctional
dream.
breakup ever, and it was just like so many people had died in close succession at that point that it was like alienating me from everyone around me, because I was just constantly grieving, and nobody knew these people I was grieving for. Like I think they thought I was like a pathological liar or something.
And if you're in a new place, building new relationships, and coming into them with that headspace, that's going to make other people uncomfortable
one
and
after
it's going
another. And so it was just like, it was just, so I think it's attached to that feeling as well. But I couldn't afford to go to the service. I didn't grieve with anyone. There was no one around that knew who he was. So, like that's probably like the one that I kind of carry with me the most. I never really, and I didn't realize how much this was like fucking me up until I started looking at this, because I was like, what's your, because you kind of see all these examples, and it's like, this is the one that's like the sharpest focus. Like it physically hurts me when I think about it. I still get sick if I think about it too long. And it's like I'll see something that reminds me of him, or something stupid like the Fast and the Furious or whatever. I watched that movie, the first one, with him so many times that I could like just quote dialogue. Because I just
live your life 1/4 mile at a time.
like but so that's probably the biggest one, second one that's really interesting would be one of my foster brothers, probably the foster brother that my family had the longest on and off. He was beaten to death by a former classmate of mine a couple years ago.
That's crazy.
And it's just like, there's really not a lot of room to grieve for a foster sibling.
Is there not?
Like, how do you explain that to people? Like,
well, someone, it would be like grieving like a close friend.
It's like
but it's also as much as it is also family.
Yeah, once they're kind of out of the house and you're not.
He had ended up in like, he ended up in a really rough life after he went in and out of care.
Yeah.
And so he wasn't living like, he had a hard life, and then he died in a hard, horrible way. Mm. And I was like, I think I was like on the way to the aquarium or something with some friends, and I got the phone call from my sister. Poor Heather. She's had to make so many of those phone calls.
Fuck.
Because I've just always been away. I'm always away. And, or Facebook message or whatever.
You're the child abroad.
Yeah. So, like, I miss so many funerals. But that was like, they're like, oh man, what happened? I'm like, my foster brother was beaten to death. Like, I don't know how do you...
Yeah, you don't even know how to kind of explain it, so let alone grieving it.
Let alone how my parents felt.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
because they were around, but nobody was going to be like inviting them to the funeral.
Yeah.
And not to mention the fact that he was First Nations. Mm. So there was that barrier as well, right? They weren't exactly welcomed into the grieving process. So I would be very surprised if they feel like their grief was complete around this. It's very complicated. They changed this child's diapers, and he was a young man, early 20s. I don't want to give too many details because I think some privacy would be good. But,
of course, yeah.
But, so I think about that too. I think about my parents and, and the only people that they could possibly understand it would be each other, and they don't talk. So it's like...
Yeah, that's fucked up. So then if that's your primary support group and you're no longer on speaking terms, it's like it's pretty easy to feel pretty alienated and isolated. And like my sisters aren't equipped to deal with that. It's just one of those things. It was just like a sad story with a sad end, and it was just shitty. And there's like, and that's the end of that story, and you just don't really know where to put that. So those are probably like the two most like, sharp examples of disenfranchised grief. Sure. Although there are many, and but mostly just because I just don't see like a clear solution to that, because it's like, yes, also you can seek people out in the farther tier, but when there's such specific experiences, you long for people to know what you're talking about or understand the depth of your relationship with them or the effect they had on you. And when you're grieving, it's really hard to put that into words. Yeah. And also it's just like having to defend yourself basically for grieving. It's pretty hard. Yeah, feeling like you have to explain why you're grieving instead of just grieving. Just because you can't grieve with the people who knew them, because it's not appropriate or recognized. Mm-hmm. You miss out on that aspect of mourning where, where you're sharing the stories and then, so I'll like tell stories about him, but people will be like, oh, cool. Like, like they don't know. Yeah. And I'm fortunate I have my sisters for that, but man, they're in pain too, right? And especially like with my first kiss, like they have their own shit to carry with how that played out, you know? So it's like... Especially because they were in contact with him close to... Exactly, right? So like this, when you're piling complicated grief on complicated grief, there's not really... there's not a clear way to deal with that. Yeah. But I know I've got to, because it's like, it's been poisoning my life. All of this incomplete grief, I can see like straight lines to behaviors I've taken on as a result of not knowing how to deal with it, and like bad decisions I've made. 100%.
that were related to that.
Yeah, I've definitely dealt with grieving in some unhealthy ways in the past.
What's like the least healthy way?
Oh, I don't know.
There's just so many.
My choice was like alcohol and just fucking around.
Yeah.
Being unsafe.
Yeah,
And,
that's a big one.
Yeah,
for
that's
sure.
all about, right?
Yeah.
I definitely, sorry, family, but I definitely, went out and, I'm just going to go get laid or whatever and, looked for, physical
You're just grasping
comfort
for comfort.
because I don't have somebody that I feel comfortable enough emotionally
Yeah.
to kind of share those feelings. So you just look for, a physical version of that.
Yeah.
Just validate
Intimacy.
me.
Yeah, exactly.
My
Someone to hold me
somehow.
and make me feel small
Yeah.
in their arms.
Yeah, exactly.
Big, strong man.
I just want a bear to cradle me.
Yeah. No, I get that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, but you don't know that's what you're doing while you're doing it.
No.
Yeah.
And I still do shit like that, I still.
Have you told Adam?
Yeah, I think he fucking knows.
Should we talk about some death
Yeah.
things that
Non-death related grief.
Yeah, because that's something that I didn't
Me
think
neither.
of that I think is a huge thing that really, or even specifically divorce was one. Talking about my parents' divorce earlier was something that I was 20 when they got divorced, and at the time was I thought I was oh well I know this is their thing. This has nothing to do with me. So I was it was a surprise, and I was oh, this changes what I thought my future would be. If I ever get married or whatever, my parents being there, that kind of thing. But I was but I know it's not about me. So I thought I was
you're just
okay with it
about it. Yeah.
Just be strong for them.
But you're not just
And
losing
help-
that. You're
Yeah,
losing,
kind of
mom and
support,
dad
and
through it.
because it affected, especially my youngest sister, it affected her quite a bit.
Yeah.
She was a teenager at the time. Both my sisters were teenagers. And so just kind of seeing that. But in hindsight, looking back, it definitely shaped how I view relationships and things like that, and
Oh, yeah.
how I view commitment. Made me afraid of commitment to a certain degree, for sure. Where my last serious relationship, I was kind of 1 foot out the door the whole time.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that had something to do with it.
You just had the armor up.
Yeah,
almost preemptively.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because there was a time when I thought, oh, you can get married and be together forever, and that's what happens, and then that kind of shattered that to a certain degree, and now I'm still, I think, trying to figure out what my opinions of that kind of stuff are.
I still can't believe I got married.
Yeah.
There are some times where I'm like,
Yeah.
Who am I?
how is this going to work? So it's just a day at a time kind of thing.
Yeah. And I when it comes to marriage and my feelings on it, it's kind of been, I would like to get married, I think, but also I'm not, it's kind of an either way thing.
Yeah.
I'm also very, very far from getting married.
Yeah.
Yeah. Single as shit.
Feel ya. Feel ya,
It's
brother.
I was I don't know if I'll ever get married, and then I just met someone who was just good enough to be
And then
an
you're
exception, So that's kind of the.
But and that's something that specifically in the last probably couple years I've really started reflecting on and realizing more and more the effect that had on me without me being aware of it.
Yeah. When you don't have healthy relationships to model from as well, it just feels like.
Yeah, and then they got divorced, and then I got a little bit older, and then I started hearing more about their marriage and stuff like that, and why it didn't work out and stuff like that. And there was no, at least as far as I know, there was no infidelity or anything like that.
There was no moment.
No, but it was just kind of a slow progression of two different people wanting different things.
Yeah, and that can happen.
And then kind of just recognizing that, right? And so, I don't know. It's a strange thing that these things have an effect on you, right?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I have similar feelings about my mom and dad's divorce, where same thing, my sister was affected more by it immediately. So it's one of the first things that my sister asked my mom when she told us that that they were splitting up was, she was who's going to walk me down the aisle?
Oh, yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
that was the first thing that she was concerned about, and I was just kind of trying to be there for her in a lot of ways. I didn't really, I was well, mom and dad have been they haven't been the greatest for a couple years now, so
Mm-hmm.
maybe this is for the best, and like dad's gonna go back to school, and like he's gonna whatever, and
Yeah.
everything will be kind of the same, and I don't really have to worry about this too much.
Yeah, and that's something that I
guess
think.
that's a female concern.
Well,
Yeah.
that might also just. That might, I
The
mean,
wedding situation.
that
Yeah.
might also just be again like a kind of patriarchal man up kind of thing. You know, you're like, oh, you're a dude. You're not. You know, this shouldn't bother you that much, right? Or you know.
Exactly, and it was like a thing that maybe my sister hadn't as much telegraphed it. Like
Yeah.
I kind of saw it coming.
Right.
In a
You're
couple-
older,
Yeah, well, no, I can't remember exactly. I think I was 11 or 12.
but older than your sister.
No, I'm 18 months younger.
Oh.
Yeah. So it was something that I was sad about it for sure
Yeah.
when they split up, but I knew that like I'll still see my dad every month or so, and I spent a summer living with him in Vancouver, and I was still really close with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want to say it didn't affect me, but it definitely, it soured, like I was so young, but it like already at that point, it like soured my taste on relationships.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know, even in like my first high school relationships, I was just like, this is not that important.
Yeah. This is not a priority
This isn't my priority.
because it's just gonna. There's a timer on it, basically.
Yeah,
kind
and I
of,
was
right?
just like a young kid fucking around.
Yeah.
I was going through all the motions, and I was like telling girls that I loved them, and like just giving them
Right.
what they wanted to hear, and being like a stupid, shitty 17-year-old, 16-year-old boy.
Yeah.
And I was just like, this is fine because like true love doesn't exist and all this like stupid nihilistic young guy shit.
Yeah.
And I think that part of that still definitely lives in me today, and it's colored by later relationships, maybe not to as a drastic of an extent as my really early relationships, but
it has an effect, even if it's a subtle effect, right?
yeah,
That's kind
for
of under
sure.
there.
The armor's always on.
There's probably a reason why you and I are, like we said, both very single.
Yes.
That's good.
Another one on this list that I thought was interesting was a miscarriage
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
or abortion, even as well, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think women are just starting to talk about their experiences of grief with miscarriage publicly.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was like Michelle Obama last year. She talked about her experience with miscarriage.
Did
and
she?
there was just like this huge sigh of relief for all these women who are like, oh, fuck.
Because
Yeah.
that is
Like-
something
You
you
can finally talk
Holy
about this.
shit. Yeah. And it's just like you don't find out how many people go through that as a woman until you go through it. And then it's just like your coworker is just like, oh yeah, I had 3 miscarriages before I had my baby, or you know, like, and nobody talks about it until you're going through it. So certainly men are not.
I was pretty
Oh,
oblivious
yeah.
to
Yeah.
it until a few years ago. A girl I went to high school with had a miscarriage,
Yeah.
and she was very, very public about it, like on like Facebook and stuff like that, and grieving it. To the point where I remember having a conversation with somebody, I don't remember who it was, but somebody saying like that we both knew her, and saying like, yeah, you know, like a lot of time had passed. It had been like, and you know, like the year anniversary, she was posting about it. It was kind of the majority of what she was posting about was that. And having this conversation with this person of them, and me even having that thought for like a second too, of like, all right, like it's been a while. But then, you know, when you have that kind of thought, you should check back in and be like, well, you can't dismiss somebody else's grief just because you don't understand it, right?
Yeah.
Well, and there's that added layer as well, because people are doing like, you do a pregnancy announcement on Facebook and then you miscarry.
Yeah.
That's
And you
rough.
get people messaging you being like, when's the baby due?
Yeah.
You kind of have to address it publicly, and that's this whole other layer.
For sure.
And that's tied in with like IVF as well, and just kind of a general struggle with infertility and the stigma that sits around that too.
That was an interesting one on this list too, of grieving infertility, like
Yeah.
grieving the loss of just the
The
fact that you can't have children.
the chance to have children.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's an enormous amount of pressure. Yeah. We should probably talk a little bit about coping before we go.
Sure.
Coping with disenfranchised grief, so we don't
How
just like
to do it.
open a wound and then just
And then
leave it there.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
point.
that's fair.
Just like, hey, yeah, disenfranchised grief, tough,
these-
huh?
Yeah, that
well, goodbye,
sucks.
everyone.
All 100 of our listeners.
You're on your own.
Yeah, sorry.
Um,
Get out of here.
Actually, first, I'd like to talk about a little bit about bereavement standards in Canada.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's like
yeah.
a contributor to disenfranchised grief is how our society views bereavement. We'll have a link to the bereavement leave page on the Government of Canada website.
On the YouTube only, because we can't do links in Spotify or iTunes. Sorry.
Yeah, or go to our Facebook page. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
Or Facebook, yeah. Sure, why not?
Yeah.
Fine, go to Facebook.
If you want it, the links are out there.
If you absolutely must, go to our Facebook and like it and
Or
follow
just
it.
do what I did and Google
Fine.
search bereavement leave Canada law. Like that's all.
It's
I
pretty
do.
easy to find, actually.
Yeah.
You guys are listening to podcasts. You know how the internet
Yeah.
works.
Okay.
I remember having to look it up and then being able to find it within one Google search.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One page and one Google search.
Yeah, it's really easy to find, really disappointing to read.
Yes.
So,
Depending on which side of it you're on.
yeah,
For the employers, it's fucking great.
yeah, it's A-okay. So this is for employees that have been working more than 3 consecutive months, not contractors,
Yep.
which is an important thing. That employers are legally obligated to provide 3 days of paid leave for
3
bereavement
whole days
of an immediate family member.
just an immediate.
If
family
you work less than 3 months, you get 3 days off, but they're unpaid. Some employers will have policies where it goes up to like 5 days or something like that. If your employer has a policy that supersedes the law, obviously, if they've agreed to that, they have to follow that agreement.
This is something that I was totally oblivious to
This ship has
before reading this.
Really?
Like I had no idea. I would have and I have been working when somebody's died, and I've maybe taken the day off for the funeral, and that's it. I didn't realize I could.
You can get like 50. I think it's 56 days
Well, the thing-
caregiver leave if you're caring for someone who's terminal or has a life-threatening illness.
But the thing is, it's also, depending on who died when you were working, you might not be eligible for bereavement.
So
Because
let's
it has to
talk
be,
about what qualifies.
Like common law or
Yeah.
immediate family, basically.
In the law, an immediate family member includes. I'm just gonna say you instead of employee. Just
Yeah.
so if your spouse or common law partner dies, common law being you live together for a year or more at the time of their death. So if you live together for 9 months,
Sorry.
too bad.
And it would have to
Go
be,
fuck yourself.
And it's also something.
Get back to work.
Yeah.
It's also something that legally common law too, right? So you might have been living with somebody for 2 years, but you didn't.
Didn't file common law,
Yeah.
In BC, I actually this is quite recent. It's actually really if you live with someone for I think it's 2 months now. This is recent. You're
Really?
qualified as common law.
Saskatchewan, I
Really?
think, is 6.
Yeah. It was 6 before, but I think in BC it's 2. I'll
Yeah.
have to look that up, but I'm pretty sure because I was like,
But that's. But I've also known people that
just
are.
wanted to make sure I could get half of Adam's shit when we moved in together.
Right.
Just want to see.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Of course.
But
exactly
yeah,
where
I
that
know
put
people
me.
that have lived together for years, but they were in university or something like that, and
Yeah.
with their grants or something like that, say they can't be filing as common law, so they
Yeah.
are, all their mail's going to their parents' house or something like that, but they're technically. So there are situations like that too, where if that was the case, your employer doesn't have to recognize that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For all those hard-working college
Yeah.
students who are also working full-time jobs that have people that pass
God.
away.
Fuck. I feel
What a
for
shitty
ya.
situation to be in.
If your mother or father passes away, if your step-parents pass away,
Foster parents and foster children, I think, is in there.
is it? Doesn't look like
I
it.
think so. I thought it was.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Nope.
Really?
Nope.
Interesting.
Not
Well, that's not good.
necessarily foster children, but any relative of the employee who resides permanently with the employee
Right.
or with whom the employee permanently resides. So if you live with someone,
And they
But-
pass away.
Could be
it
like a
says
distant
says relative though, so I
Yeah.
don't know how close they're doing that. It could be, yeah. So also your children, obviously, the children of your spouse if you have stepchildren, your grandchildren, brothers and sisters, grandfather, grandmother, and yeah, in-laws.
Mm-hmm.
So if your partner's parents die, but that's it, 3 days. So that is the thing that we definitely can work on in Canada. 3 days. You don't even get over a flu in 3 days, so I'm not sure why you should be over the death of a loved one.
Yeah.
It also totally doesn't recognize alternative types of family relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Like, say you were excommunicated and you have to build a family from scratch. Say your adoptive mother, friend.
Say I died, and like, so then my kid and his mom's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do they do?
Yeah.
Where do you fit with that?
Yeah, exactly, right? So
You know?
that's an entirely new situation
Yeah,
that is
because
not
you don't.
recognized.
Yeah, you don't have legal guardianship.
No.
So.
But even if, like, say, like, you have, like, your best friend or something,
Yeah.
and you're, like, even if you're, like, living with them, and you've been living together for, like, 6 years, and you're, like, close, and you spend every day together to a certain extent, if they passed away, nowhere in there does that say that you qualify for bereavement.
No.
No matter how, they can be closer to you than your blood relatives.
Yeah.
If your child dies,
Yeah.
you still get 3 days.
You get a
Unless
long weekend.
they're murdered.
The thing, yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's
That's
like
different.
Yeah, there's like if your child or is in an active missing person's investigation.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
you get up to like 3 months or something.
Is it murdered or is it a victim of a crime? Because, like, in some cases, suicide counts as a victim. You're a victim of a crime.
Yeah.
If you're
Because you murdered yourself?
Yeah.
no,
you
the
can,
people that were close to you.
Yeah, you can have
are
access
victims
to.
of-
Oh,
different-
you're the... Okay, I see what you're saying.
Are
like certain
victims of
types of
person,
counseling
the
and stuff
crime
like that are
perpetrated.
only available for people who are victims of crime.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
Which are great resources, by the way.
I did not realize that,
Yeah.
that you would be classified as...
Depends on the suicide.
Yeah, I
But yeah.
guess.
So definitely, yeah. I'm not gonna get into the killed kids thing because I can't handle it. So
Fair
look
enough.
that up yourselves.
Why? How come?
It's such a light topic.
Yeah,
But
I don't-
it's longer.
You just shrug it off. Just shrug it off.
Okay, so now we're
No.
gonna move past that. Obviously, we need to advocate for longer bereavement.
for sure.
So
People shouldn't be losing their jobs because someone they love died and they're not over it in 3 days. I think that's horrible.
So speaking as a former employer and how we handled death of one of our staff members, close loved ones, that wasn't specifically covered by bereavement, it was this really tricky thing because we were getting pressure from the owner to hire someone new.
Yeah.
But we were like, well, this person who's grieving will be better soon, and we really don't want to lose this person, so we're going to wait. And we're like, luckily we had, enough people in place at that point that we could handle it, but I could see how in a certain situation, even if you were an employer, if you were getting pressure, like if you didn't have enough staff
Yeah.
and this person was just not ready to come back to work.
They would have absolutely no recourse in letting them go.
Yeah.
So you've got two traumas on top
Exactly.
of one.
And I could see how it would quickly become too much pressure for an employer, no matter how much they wanted to give that person, as much time to grieve as they wanted and needed. And eventually it would become a point where we were either too busy to facilitate having lost this one major person in our team. And I could see how, regardless of how much you care about that person, you would eventually have to fill the spot if they were just unable to come back to work, which was the case.
Well, it's
So
not even
it's just one of those things where sometimes it's not in the control of the employer either.
No, but I mean, businesses need to be supported and set up and obligated in a way
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
where that is built into the business plan. You
Yeah.
know, like bereavement and benefits, I really feel for people in the restaurant business because they have no safety nets
Absolutely not.
at all.
You can't even call in sick, really,
No.
in that industry. 'cause
Which you
everyone
absolutely
is
should
relying
be
on
able
you,
to
and it's the
because you're
bare
handling
minimum.
food.
Yeah, no, I've cooked a lot of people food being sick out of my
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
Which is horrible.
Got flu or
And the
cold.
owners are aware of it and know it and totally
Yep.
okay with it because that's the way
Not
that works.
to mention the
If you
fact
eat in
that
a
Who else are
restaurant-
they going to call?
even though they held the position for this person, this was unpaid leave.
Yeah.
People can't afford
Yeah.
to stay home
Exactly.
and grieve.
yeah.
Eventually they just have to come back to work because they can't afford to.
And
It's
that
like
was, that was basically the situation.
you lose your job, you can't pay your rent.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that reminds me that just a few shitty things in a row, just never judge a homeless person because it just doesn't take that much. A few shitty things in a row can really rob someone of their lifestyle.
Yep.
And people who are living paycheck to paycheck, which is, always an alarming statistic.
I can't remember what the statistic was, but the vast majority of people have less than $1,000 in their bank account.
Yeah.
Which I can relate to that.
Hey, me too. # me too.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's not how that's used.
Is that not
I don't
what
know.
that
It doesn't feel
hashtag
right.
stands for?
Yeah.
That's a different thing.
Is that a different thing? I've been using it wrong.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
# broke boy.
Hashtag
me
hidden
too.
homeless. Okay. Healing before Jordan has to go to work.
Yeah.
Whatever. If I'm late, I'm late.
Do his grind. Yeah, now you're just resenting the whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, I've
Fuck those
I've
guys.
been resentful for months.
Yeah.
Okay.
Months. Years.
So
The industry in general.
So I have a link from Psychology Today,
Mm-hmm.
and also what'syourgrief.com, Disenfranchised Grief. So some coping tools. First things first, if no one's going to give you permission to grieve, you got to give yourself permission to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
You got to take that on. Acknowledge that your grief is real, and that if you're grieving for someone who's passed away, that the person was significant, and that what you feel is real and valid.
Yeah, validating your feelings is very
Yeah.
important. That's
Yeah.
something that I personally need to be better at,
Yeah.
and I've been working on the last few years for sure.
Same.
And focusing on the love aspect as well. You can focus on the loss too, but also like not just that the feeling of loss is real, but the love that is creating that sense of loss is real. That they were part of your life. So that's one.
Mm-hmm.
Ties into the second one. Remind yourself that you are worthy of time and space to grieve. Someone's gonna say something shitty and dumb.
Yeah. They always do.
They just come out of everywhere. People don't know how to handle it, so they're just like, I'll just say this stupid platitude, and maybe it'll
help you feel better.
It is what it is, right,
Hey,
guys?
Yeah.
Hey, I'll give you some perspective.
Yeah. Has anyone
Wrong
told you to
perspective.
turn that frown upside down?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. A lot of people just are trying to help, right?
Yeah.
Instead of just
But they don't
being
fucking know
supportive,
how.
and so that ends up just making things worse in a lot of cases. I think.
And then you resent people that give you shitty advice.
This suggests having like a physical reminder, like writing down on a card, like what
Yeah.
I'm feeling is valid and real. And then every time somebody says something shitty, to just
Pull it out and
Read
read
it
Yeah, I
and
thought that
just-
was interesting.
have like a material object to just be like, okay, because sometimes, just saying it to yourself,
Yeah.
it's just not enough. Even if you wrote it down, having like something outside of yourself to tell you. Also, number 3, you're not alone. Find other people who can support you. There's so many communities online now. If you're suffering from disenfranchised grief, you can find people who've been through what you've been through.
Yeah.
Sometimes even just reading other people's experiences and knowing that this isn't something that you have to deal with on your own can be really helpful. And it can help you do it in a way where you're not necessarily relying on the people immediately close to it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something safe about that. I mean, obviously, the internet is a scary, dark, troll-filled place, but there's some really good parts of that for people who are experiencing disenfranchised grief.
Totally.
4 would be to create your own ritual. I definitely want to do this with you guys at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Go out and acknowledge it. Put down some symbol of your loss or the person you're grieving, and just take space and time to recognize this specific loss. I always say that's a great thing to do, and I never fucking do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So I would like to do that at some point. And then, planting a tree, visiting a meaningful place, creating something, just something physical and where you're just taking space. And also assess your support systems. We talked about this a lot, kind of seeking out people who are equipped to support you.
Mm-hmm.
If people who would normally be your go-to people aren't supportive, just go out a little farther. Just keep going out a little farther until you can find someone.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're grieving and you're not getting that support, like that's recognizing that is important, and just being like, all right, well, I guess I'll have to find that somewhere else with somebody different, right?
Yeah. And that's the online community stuff is handy. So you don't have to leave your little cave.
Yeah.
You can just
Nobody wants to leave their
do
cave.
that remotely.
I love my cave. I basically live in it.
Yep.
Yeah.
6 is seek personal ways to explore grief and express your emotions. This is where creating art, journaling, photography, starting a podcast.
Hey, what? Oh, hey, what?
Hey-o.
That's not what we're doing. This isn't purely for us.
This is like I would love to help some people here, but I'm definitely this is the first kind of topic where I'm just like, oh, I'm on my own journey with this. Like,
it's a personal journey for sure.
It seems
for all of
obvious
us.
considering my experiences and stuff like that obviously this would have personal meaning to me, but I think this is the first time I've realized like, oh,
yeah,
that's what this is.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I've shared more with you guys in these like, what was it, 6 recordings now, than I have with like a lot of my family members.
Yeah, right.
Like there's exclusive family members that I've shared pretty much everything with, but like and friends as well that I've shared everything with. But like, yeah, this is definitely as much therapy for us as it is.
Yeah,
for sure.
We don't owe
education
each
and
other
entertainment.
anything.
No.
We're not here to like comfort each other. We just need to be honest with ourselves.
Yeah, we're just here to share our experiences.
You're not responsible. You're responsible for your own mental health. You're not a victim of it, but you have to be aware of it, and and you can seek support and stuff like that, obviously. But there's to a certain degree you have to recognize it yourself, and that's your responsibility.
Well, and it's something that we can do. We got to practice what we preach. If it's like when I sent you guys a message, just being like, "Hey, I'm feeling this topic this week. Like this is affecting me."
Yeah.
I didn't want you to do anything with it. I just wanted to say, this is happening, and this is something I'm dealing with, because if I can learn how to do that, then maybe other people will feel empowered to do that later.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the most important thing to me is number 7, to be a support to others experiencing disenfranchised grief. Now that you know what it is and what it looks like, if somebody's like, dog walker passes away and they're feeling it, fight that impulse to dismiss their grief.
Yeah.
Fight that impulse to say something dismissive. Yeah. Like, oh, you'll find another dog walker.
Oh, it'll be okay.
It's fine. You pay attention. If somebody's talking about a loss that's not recognized, to listen and hold space. Acknowledging people's experiences is sometimes enough to be supportive.
For sure.
You don't have to fix things for them. You really can't fix things for them, but just being available and open is really the best we can do.
Yeah.
Just being there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I definitely, after reading this and having this conversation and stuff like that, it's changed my perception of grief and how I will be dealing with other people's grief.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Right?
Yeah, I agree.
If you don't recognize it, you can't deal with it. And if you don't talk about it, you can't recognize it. And like, why deal with the grief, right? What is so bad about disenfranchised grief is that it leads to incomplete grief. And incomplete grief leads to all kinds of shit. You can fucking isolate yourself. You can, develop shitty patterns like addictions and, just you can really fuck up your body.
Any kind of self-destructive behavior.
Yeah, it's just shitty coping. And it's just like you just carry it with you. People need closure. People need to heal. If you don't acknowledge grief, you can't heal from it. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of resources for that too. And if you are listening to this and you're feeling like, oh, I might have some incomplete grief, there are some resources that we'll have linked to, some tools you can use. But ultimately, if you're using these tools and a long period of time goes by and you are still processing your grief about something, doesn't matter if it's a pet, it doesn't matter if it's your spouse, you need to seek professional help, because not dealing with your grief will, if you don't deal with it, it will deal with you. And we need to encourage healing around death and grief in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way to do that is to deal with your own grief.
Yeah, it's not weaker if you're asking for professional help for something that you can't deal with on your own.
Yeah.
No, and you're not a burden on other people either.
No, especially
for
if
how
it's,
you
especially
feel.
if it's their job.
Especially if it's their job.
Yeah.
And it's easy to feel guilty when you're still feeling grief after a time where you're like, I should be over this by now. But if you never process it to begin with, there's no getting over it. You know, and yeah, it's not like people just wake up better. And sometimes, you know what, like grief just never goes away. You just deal with it differently. There's not the time heals all wounds thing is kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
It's something people say, but it's not real, you know. So it's not about like fixing it. It's about learning how to cope with it in a way that moves you forward instead of keeping you in the same place. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And and if you want to talk about like disenfranchised grief and your disenfranchised grief, like we have the Facebook page and stuff like that as well. We can have a dialogue going.
We want to hear from you. And if we got something wrong, or if there was some part of this that you felt like could have had more detail, just let us know. I mean, it's a big subject because it covers so many different types of grief. So I'm sure
64, I believe.
Yeah. Thanks. Whatsyourgrief.com.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just let us know, because we want to create support, you know, and space for people who are dealing with these issues.
Yeah. And if you comment on our Facebook or anything, we're not going to share what you said without asking you first.
Absolutely.
So
anonymous.
It's completely anonymous, but we do appreciate your feedback, and we love the chance to share other people's stories.
Yeah.
I think as much as our own, because talking about only our experiences forever will get a little old.
Yeah, I mean, community is important, right? And I think we're trying to
and that
build
is
support.
the number one. That is the way to deal with disenfranchised grief, is to open it up. Grief is for everyone.
Grief is for everyone.
There's
you
no,
get a grief.
Yeah.
You get a grief. Everyone gets a free grief.
Grief all around.
We're just all suffering through it. So, I mean, the more we can talk about it, probably the better everyone will be.
Hopefully the better.
Not worse.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it, right?
All right.
So is that it? Is that
I think
Sorry,
we can
I talked so much.
No, that
roll
was,
the
that was
outro.
very good.
Yeah.
All right. Follow us on the social medias. Death Pod. Gmail. deathpod@gmail.com.
Correct.
Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. We love you.
And remember,
We're all gonna die.
we're all gonna die.
And that's okay.
And that's okay. Grief for everyone.
You get a grief. You get a grief. Oh man.
Sweaty. It's the coffee.
Yeah. I'm still vibrating. Like I'm gonna be driving home and like my vehicle's gonna be shaking down the
I
road.
have to be careful with this. It's my first time